be pleased to know that we did leave MeetUp here.
Okay. Feel free to let him know that you felt welcome.
Yes. I absolutely. And then the other thing is,
I think Jeremy's on our board.
he is, yeah. And so you probably know David Bunis.
By name, I wouldn't say I really know it. Yeah.
David's a friend of mine.
Oh,
And,
okay.
when he came on board, he brought another friend of ours who just left, Jeff Snyder.
Okay.
And Jeff had been working on the tech transfer stuff.
Oh, all right.
And,
Okay.
yeah, but the volume was just about WPI.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. People tend to be pretty fond of it. It's good.
We're good. Nice of you guys to let us come here.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Everybody find a seat and let us, or not, I guess you can stand. And we're going to commence with our October Security of Things meetup. This is the first one we've had, I think, since last spring, maybe in summer. So it's a little bit of a hiatus over the summer. But we're back stronger than ever. We've got a wonderful presentation for you today and another next month. And Jeff and I are gonna make sure that we have good programming right through 2020. So there's a lot going on in this space, obviously, and David's actually, both as an investor and a technologist himself, is going to get, I think, a really good sense of some of this stuff, some of the interesting stuff that's happening in the Internet of Things security space. I have a sign-up sheet. I have a sign-up sheet, which I will be passing around, and I'd like to know who's here in the flesh. And we are going to be streaming it and recording it as well, so it will be available offline if there are parts of David's presentation you want to go back and look at. Just business-wise, we had a really interesting hearing yesterday at the State House on digital right to repair, and we had a couple Security of Things members who actually testified at that hearing. Really good back there. Thank you so much. As well as Ming Chow from Tufts, who is not here tonight, but was there at the hearing yesterday and testified on behalf in favor of the right to repair law. So for IoT, this is a really important kind of legal movement that you should be following, which is 20 states, including Massachusetts, brought forth digital right to repair legislation in the last legislative season. It got kind of killed off in all those states by industry opposition, but most of these laws will be coming back. And this is really about really core rights of kind of ownership and property in the age of the IoT. So do you have a right to be able to fix and repair connected smart devices that you own? And that is an area that's legally murky, as is the issue around data ownership and data privacy right now. So we don't have very good, the law has not caught up with the technology. So yes.
I think it's important to point out that Massachusetts was the first state to pass an auto right to repair.
And the only one so far.
Forcing data to be available.
Right. So the Lexington and Concord of this battle was really around automobile repair data. And about 8 or 9 years ago, independent auto body shops started to find that they were not being given access to, that much of the diagnostic work they were doing was software based, right? The ECU on these cars was basically telling them what the problem was, and then they could go and fix it. But that OEMs were kind of denying access to the software that they needed to read the codes and figure out what was wrong. So the Independent Auto Repair Association, Auto Care Association, was able to work successfully in Massachusetts to get an auto right to repair law passed. So that basically said, you have to give owners and independent repair shops access to this diagnostic software. They are authorized dealers and authorized repair shops use. When we passed that law, basically the Detroit kind of came to the table and said it passed by ballot initiative, 80% to 20% or something. The table said, we'll recognize Massachusetts law nationally. So basically, if you go into an independent repair shop nationally and get your car serviced. It's because voters in Massachusetts created that legal right. So a couple things are happening. First of all, that battle has shifted. So there was a carve out in that law 4 years ago for wireless telematics data. The people who were backing auto right to repair didn't understand that that was a kind of where diagnostics were going, that it wasn't going to be through the software and the dealer. It was going to be directly to the OEM's cloud, which is where things are now. So there's a carve out for that. Independent auto repair shops are again being cut out of the loop because they don't have access to the OEM's cloud. There's a bill pending on that. And there's this kind of digital right to repair, which is really about trying to get same basic rights, but for a much broader population of devices. Everything from iPhones to smart home appliances, agricultural equipment, the John Deere tractors, and Caterpillar equipment. So it's a much bigger population, and therefore, not surprisingly, much bigger fight. So that's where we are right now, but it was a really interesting hearing, and pay attention to it. I'll try and keep you guys in the loop on what's happening with that. So that's our business. And then we've got a great talk coming up next month, but I wanted to introduce our wonderful host once again this month, Worcester Polytech and Mike Ahern, who's going to tell you a little bit about what's going on at WPI, and we should all thank him both as a group and individually for giving us access to this amazing facility.
Well, thanks. Thanks, Paul. Thanks. And good evening, everybody. How are you doing tonight?
Good.
Okay, yeah, I understand people are here from India and Texas specifically to see your presentation. Or maybe I misunderstood them. They're here from India and Texas, and they're here to see.
I think it's probably more the latter.
It might be that. So welcome everybody, one and all. This is Worcester Polytechnic Institute's Seaport Facility, and this is an attempt by WPI to be more present in the Boston community. And so we've been leasing the space for about 1.5 years now, and we've been pleased to host a few of these security of things meetups. Of course, this group fits very well with WPI from the point of view of we do teach computer science, we teach cybersecurity, we teach it on campus, we teach it online. So it's right in line with the kinds of things that we are very supportive of. And the school is a nonprofit. The mission is educate people. So we're happy to try to help out. So welcome all.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, for my next guest, David. I've known David for a number of years going back because you're an investor in the technology space, and we've talked with regard to other companies. Minim, which is one of the companies, well, pretty much the company we're going to be talking about tonight. My connection to Minim is really interesting, which is that I was at my high school reunion. I was talking to my good friend growing up in Wellesley, Alfred, and asking him what he was up to. And he was like, well, I'm the CTO for this company, a technology company up in New Hampshire. I said, that's really interesting. What do they do? Oh, we do Internet of Things security. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, well, tell me more about what you do, because this is what I'm spending a lot of my time doing. So that's how I actually heard about Minim. But of course, we know about Minim because of its founder, about DynCorp, which was sort of well, you can talk about the origins of Minim, but one of them would be the Mirai botnet. Yeah.
And yesterday was the 3rd anniversary.
And yesterday was the 3rd anniversary. Yes, that's right. It was an October attack. We actually had folks in here to talk about the Dyn botnet, the Mirai botnet, and the attack on Dyn in New Hampshire. Hancock, who was on the receiving end of that attack, it inspired him to start thinking in a more holistic way about IoT security. So it's a really interesting story, and I'm so glad to have David here to talk to us about it and about Minim. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here, and I've got a deck that has about 30 slides. I'm not going to read every slide because I'm pretty sure everybody here can read. And I think what I want to make is this conversation is interactive. The bones of this deck is really overviews we give to customers. So it'll be high level. There is not a depth of our technology in this. Feel free to ask questions, and I will, if I can answer them, I will. If I can't, I'll punt and get back to you later. But the goal is really to kind of give you a sense as to who Minim is and why we're focused on IoT security. And I'll go into a bit of the background, as Paul said. 2 minutes, maybe less on me. So as Paul mentioned, I'm an investor. I'm a partner at a venture capital firm here in Boston called Flybridge. We're a seed stage investor. I've been there for about 12 years. Prior to that, I was 10 years at Greylock. I was a partner there and have been focused on networking and security as kind of my core investment themes through my time as an investor. Prior to that, before going to the dark side, I have a bachelor and master's in computer science. My focus was in information network security, well before they called it cyber. First job out of college, I worked at Bell Labs working on DoD secure networks. My master's at USC working on private email and sadly a visa scheme to fix internet security back in the late 80s that would have modified the IETF blocked it, denied it, and it would have fixed a lot of the problems that we're dealing with right now, although it probably would have kept a lot of us from being employed. And so I have the rare experience now of having taken my operating experience, venture investing, and then along with Jeremy, his wife Liz, who are both proud WPI alums and co-founders of Dyn, and 2 others, we founded Minim. And I'll go into a little bit about the backstory in a second. But the title of this presentation is really what's the battle for cybersecurity in the smart home. And when you look at the landscape, and this is we call it Minimscape, and you see exactly how crowded and convoluted. And this is just a snapshot. We try to keep adding to it, but this is dated already. It's a confusing landscape that's only getting more confusing. When you look at the categories of devices at the top, it's really the IoT devices. You get down to the bottom, and this is our view of the world. You get down into the service provider world, and everyone's got a piece going into this. It is super confusing, expanding and creating an attack surface, which is pretty massive. You guys have seen this, but we've got IoT tsunami. We've got the Mirai botnet, which we'll talk in a moment. Inspired Jeremy. Other botnets. I mean, this is Amazon Echo's recording everything we say. I love the Fitbit in murder cases and also in divorce cases is really interesting. Some of you may know that a wife found out that her husband was cheating because she was able to figure out he was having sex with someone that wasn't her because his heart rate spiked and she saw the Fitbit run down. And so, so our Paul had mentioned before about privacy, Strava apps, if those of you are cyclists, use Strava, a guy running on a military base basically helped map Guantanamo Bay. And for us, this is kind of where it hit the big time. It's getting serious. We call this the Kardashian Index for Minim. And so in May of 2017, the interest in WannaCry almost hit the interest in Kardashians. And so when we hit kind of this crossover between what's going on in the popular press and what's going on in our world, we think that something is starting to brew. So Jeremy had founded Dyn with 3 classmates when he was, and his wife Liz, who was all WPI alum, when he was a freshman in college. He ran the company from that time for about 17 years. And as it was in the middle of a sale to Oracle, and this was probably a month away from it closing, the Mirai botnet was sprung by a couple of Minecraft gamers who were pissed off at another Minecraft gamer. You guys know all the story, and they took down 17 years of Jeremy's work in a weekend. And Jeremy's a pretty inquisitive guy. When he found out that it was 10,000 cameras reflecting and they were cheap knockoff Nest cameras, it got his mind percolating, and he realized kind of the attack surface and how porous the home was, and how vulnerable. And at the same time, I had been working on an idea internally, and at Flybridge, we kind of have since we're super early stage investors, we will occasionally, I wouldn't say frequently, but occasionally incubate ideas internally. And I had been incubating a similar idea really with, not from the Mirai standpoint, but from the standpoint that having been involved in cybersecurity for my entire career, I was shocked that there hadn't been a consumer-focused cybersecurity company, a new one that had really reached scale, since McAfee or Symantec, which are 30-year-old, 40-year-old companies. And, and I started to do a bunch of research behind it and tried to put together an advisory board to help me do it. And Jeremy and I met up. I had heard that he was working on something here, that I was working on something, and we joined forces. What we found, was everything that we'll talk about and everything that everybody here, has kind of realized about how vulnerable the internet writ large is and how the home is just a great spot to go if you're a hacker. We also found that it wasn't just security, but it was management. The two are integral. And I was really focused on the consumer. And we have this internal meme that has helped drive the way we've been building product. And that is that we split the world into two categories. All of you in this room and anybody who happens to be watching, we would put in one category, and then the rest of the world, a much larger category. So this room we refer to as wizards, and everyone else is mortals. And the problem we saw with networking technology for consumer users is it was all built by us and for us. It was all highly technical, very hard to use. And so as a result, for my vector in terms of thinking about the space, it wasn't that no one had tried to build solutions for internet security for home users and network-based security. It's just that all of them were so complex that they never took off. They had become cult classics. You think about the original Bitdefender box, or even the Cujo box, which was pretty maligned by some, and I think that they've certainly sprinted from that emerging point. And so we felt that if we were going to build a company in this space, we had to think about it with mortals in mind, and had to think about the users of the technology being first-class citizens, that we could count on people being technology aware, but maybe not technology savvy, and they wouldn't consider themselves to be wizards. So just keep that in mind as I kind of go on, because I think that theme is important to our solution and also how we think about the product, the category more broadly. And so as we went through how we would build the company, given our backgrounds, it probably is no surprise that we thought about the service provider market. And we also thought about the way to try and address the problem of cybersecurity. You could do it from an endpoint standpoint, which I'll talk about in a little bit. You could do it from the network standpoint. And we decided that the right starting point for us, and the place where you could get the biggest bang for the buck, particularly if you're trying to satisfy mortal users, was to go after network-based security. And in doing that, we thought about how could you do this with software only. We wanted to avoid doing hardware for all the obvious reasons about how hard it is to sell hardware and maintain it and deal with repairs and returns and a bunch of other stuff that's all pretty scary. But we realized that there was really no way to do what we wanted to do without getting on the router. So we'll talk a bit more about that when we get to our solution. And that meant that the road would have to lead, certainly in this country, through service providers, because they dominate the ownership of that router that's in most people's homes, probably not most of the people in this room, myself included. So again, think about mortals, don't think about yourself, is the recurring theme here. So the battle is waging. The bad guys see the opportunity, and this is really the why now slide. So that attack surface, is growing. I think this is the Symantec numbers. That IoT attacks are increasing year-over-year 600%, and those are the ones that we know about. They categorize. We know that regulations are coming. Paul talked about what's going with the efforts in the State House here in Massachusetts. We're in good contact with Senator Warner, who's trying to do something at a federal level, and certainly if you look abroad, you see what's going on with GDPR and other countries. But on the west coast of this country, we're starting to see some things happen that could be the blueprint for the rest of the nation, and that's in California, Oregon, and Washington, where the right to privacy, the focus on IoT security is really there. So we're watching that very closely, as are vendors in the space. And then finally, consumers are concerned. So refer back to my Kardashian slide. We're starting to see more interest from mortals in security and in privacy. A huge question that you can ask and that we ask ourselves constantly is it enough that they want to pay for it? And that is something that we constantly keep in mind. We think the answer is some, and it's growing. And that's also why it's the idea of security and management may have to be synonymous for the time being. But we're also seeing this unbelievable explosion in the purchase of these devices. Everyone on the planet knows how to attach something to Wi-Fi, so they're just making this attack surface grow. Feel free, if there's any questions on this, I'm sure this is mothered in apple pie to everyone, so if you just want me to keep going faster, I can do that. I talked about the architectural choices. Endpoint versus network, a traditional question within cybersecurity, and clearly for defense in depth, we have both. In the home, I think part of the challenge with going after endpoint or trying to enable endpoint security is really the legacy devices that are out there. So unlike healthy corporations that have a refresh cycle for their hardware, consumers don't replace an internet-enabled camera until it's truly dead. And even then, they might try and revive it. So we tend the duty cycle for and the longevity of our IoT devices, it's just hard to predict. And you can't force a consumer to replace something simply because you have end-of-life support. There's some data that we have about how many IoT devices are in use where the vendors are actually out of business already, and the numbers are pretty staggering. So when we look at it, we think that network security is the fastest time to market. It's what we know how to do, and so that's where we've started. Operators are the front lines. They hear from their consumers that they need protection, that they need simplicity, and that they want remedies. And so, consumers call their ISPs when something breaks. Again, think mortals. Think of your parents or your friends who call you. And I'll use the example, throw my dad under the bus. When his printer is broken, the first person he calls is not me, it's Time Warner. And the very nice people at Time Warner help him. This is not their job description. They're not getting paid for it. They're spending hours with my father. It's costing them a ton of money. And this is not, and my dad isn't an isolated case. This happens in tremendous fashion across all these ISPs.
My dad too.
Yeah, I mean, all of us know people who do this. And so, the overwhelming number of calls we're getting, into the majority or certainly the 50% mark of the calls are for Wi-Fi problems. It may be something as simple as I need to reset my password, or it could be I don't know what's going on. And the ISPs have no visibility to understanding what's going on. And it's starting to change, but again, for most mortals, it just isn't there yet. So bottom line for network operators is if you ignore IoT security, not only are you increasing your OpEx and lowering your customer satisfaction, and keep in mind that in this country, MSOs and carriers, so ISPs broadly defined, have the lowest customer sat rates, the lowest net promoter score of any industry, anything. It's crazy. I mean, some of their net promoter scores are negative. And proactive security, and this is what we pitch to them, and we're seeing the uptick in this, is not only a way to decrease your OpEx, and the decrease of the OpEx is actually pretty simple to understand. Fewer calls, shorter calls, fewer truck rolls. But it's also a revenue opportunity because many ISPs are bundling this together. They're bundling the service that will be IoT management, IoT security. Together, they may add faster bandwidth as part of this premium service. There's a pantheon of different ways of that folks have been implementing these packages. So giants have woken, right? Broadband ISPs currently provide most of the networking devices into the home, and then you've got the two biggest I'd say threats to our little startup ecosystem. In Amazon and Google. Amazon, with the purchase of Eero, is now in the business of selling routers into the homes, and they're amping it up. There's this. I had a bet with Jeremy that Amazon would get into that device business, which I bet I won that first bet. The second bet was that Amazon would become an ISP. And so they're making moves to do this. And so imagine, and it may not be that far-fetched to think that your Amazon Prime subscription would come with your router and and you get free internet service, and then they get access to all your data and they see everything that goes, and they own that ingress and egress point, which is important to them for the rest of their businesses. On the wireless side, we're going to have new competition with the emergence of 5G. T-Mobile is standing up to basically bypass the cable and the telephone infrastructure to bring you a 5G gateway, and we're going to see others do it. And then, Facebook is kind of quietly providing internet service to the rest of the world. So this is happening where we're seeing kind of an emergence of this market, and the dominance of whether it's Comcast or RCN or any of the ISPs is not clear that it will last into the next decade. So what happens to late adopters? And you can see that this part of the presentation was aimed at ISPs who may not be the ones that were on that last slide. So those who didn't adopt broadband and quickly enough, and they were focused on dial-up, died. And so I think that those who don't think about value-added services, because the margins that they're making on their video service when they provide the video have plummeted because of over-the-top services. The money that they're spending and the costs for OpEx in terms of dealing with all these issues that they're not getting paid for, combined with lower ARPUs, is something they have to have some other solution for it, and just cutting costs isn't the way to do it, and they can't raise prices because of all this competition. So we're pretty certain, and the momentum is really building around offering these value-added services. So now start getting into what will it take to win. And again, this is Minim's view on the world. Well, we think that it needs to be AI driven. And the reason why is if there aren't enough security personnel at cybersecurity jobs, you hear the numbers, 200,000 open positions in the country, whatever the number is, it's a huge number. Now think about the ability to handle security or configuration concerns at ISPs. Do they have the right talent at those ISPs? They don't. They need force multipliers. And also keep in mind that the turnover rate around customer service at ISPs is also pretty high. We think it has to be usable, and this is really the term that we use internally to just talk about that first-class citizenship. So it's the user experience for both the end users, the subscribers, but also for the care professionals. If you think that care professionals are turning over at service providers, you need to have a set of tools for them that are easy to use and adopt. And the same way in terms of self-care for mortal users at home. It's got to be invisible. This cannot, one of the things, and we've done extensive surveys direct to consumer and working with ISPs as well, that we found for certain is that consumers just want their stuff to work. They don't want to fiddle with it. This is one of the reasons why IoT devices have a very high rate of return. I plugged it in, I did everything that I was told to do, and it doesn't work. I'm sending it back to Amazon. I'm driving it back to Best Buy. So we know that in order for this to take off, for our service or for other services to take off, it's got to be transparent to the end user. It's got to provide great insight and utility, but it can't be something that slows down their network, that gets in the way of it, that over alerts. And that's one of the huge problems that we saw with the first generation of these home network security solutions. It was the same problem we've seen in enterprise cybersecurity for years, which is the over alerting. We know that people just turn it off. And you don't care if you've gone to an adware site. You can't do anything about it. Why alert an end user? Cloud driven. So we think that to be able to coordinate this network wide, to be able to implement solutions and to pass along whether it's patches or updates kind of instantaneously across the cloud makes perfect sense. I've talked a bit about the network level. We think it's the right place to start because you can block just about everything. You can do just about everything at that point. And the asterisk there, of course, is if you're in the home, unless you have some endpoint solution on devices that are already attached to 4G or the cellular network, they can bypass what you're doing over the Wi-Fi network. And we know that with all security solutions, you can't get 100%. It's got to integrate with the solutions that service providers are using. And we've really got to focus on being compliant with the emerging laws. Minim is kind of in place, and we're operating in a number of countries already. And so we've been thinking about GDPR from inception, and we know that it's going to come in the US. So we always try to think about least common denominator in the way that we've been architecting things, and one of them is around compliance. A little bit about our team. We've got about 30 plus employees right now. Jeremy, I don't have all the senior team on this, but maybe the relevant senior team. Alec Rooney, Paul's classmate. Nicole is our CMO. Our cybersecurity lead is a guy named Sam Stelfox, and then I have this quasi role of being an investor, a co-founder, and driving strategy until I get fired. So I'll pause there. That's kind of like I'd say the 50,000 foot view, and then I can go to 10,000 feet if people want to see a little bit about our solution, or you can get questions or anything. How we doing? Okay. I'll keep going until you tell me to shut up. So I talked about usable security. This is a bit about our architecture. So I'm not going to point at the different things in the slide. There are a few components to how we've architected our solution. There's an agent. It's a very small piece of C code that is portable to any modern network platform. We talk about the I can name that tune in one note as we think about the agent. Agent's 100K of compiled C code, and it's meant to work on the cheapest knockoff, Wi-Fi gateways out there, all the way up to sophisticated gateways. We've open sourced it. We've got an open source project you can find on the Minim website for people who want, and we ported it to Raspberry Pi for people who want to do that. That's not where our secret sauce is. The intelligence of what we do is in the cloud. So we've got the agent, which is an enabler. It can be, we've got a system in place with automated testing to basically port, test, certify within a short period of time on gateway devices. In the cloud, we have kind of our cloud operations, which do IoT fingerprinting, which I'll get into in a moment, and that's really the core of what we do. So very little telemetry information coming from the home network. We don't want to burden the network with just tons of flows coming through. And we also don't invade privacy. Remember, that's also one of our core tenets. So we've tested this, and we believe we have the highest accuracy in terms of fingerprinting any device on a home network. And we do it all from the cloud using 100K of C code. So that's where we've been spending our time and energy in terms of development. We're building an ever increasingly large IoT database. And this database, and sometimes I struggle a little bit to describe it effectively, so you'll tell me if this works. I describe it as a semi-dynamic database. So we've fingerprinted tens of thousands of devices at this point, individual devices from every category you can imagine. Think back to that Minimscape diagram. We match it up against, and this is where the semi-dynamic comes, developer vendor information on those devices. So I don't have slides, and I'm not going to do a demo today of our system, but if a care operator is looking at your home network because you called with a problem with your Sonos Play 5, it'll quickly identify and correctly identify that it's a Sonos Play 5. It will have the name that you've given it, so it'll say Jeff's Office Play 5. And then when the operator clicks on it, and you can also get access to the same things in our mobile app, we'll see if there are any issues with it. For the care professional, it'll have a picture of that device, which is important if you're talking to a care professional and they're asking you to look at the configuration of the cables. Think about the return issue. A lot of the return issues are because people didn't wire it properly. And so now, as opposed to a conversation with a care professional today is, I've got a problem with my Sonos, I got a problem with my Roku, go reboot the device. Did that work? No. Go reboot your router. No visibility. Here, you call up and you say, I've got a problem with my Sonos device. What's the problem? I can't stream Pandora. We can look at a running image of the bandwidth, and we can see, hey, there's a drop-off. We can look at the signal strength of the device if it's attached to Wi-Fi, and we can determine that there's a problem with the Wi-Fi. That could be channel congestion. It could be it's too far from the access point. And then the conversation with the care professional to the subscriber is one, hey, we think you've got a problem with bandwidth. Here are some things that you can do, and we are evolving playbooks that we can give them for these things. Or we're certain that you've got a problem in terms of coverage in your home because we see this with the rest of your devices. These are the insights that Minim provides them. We're going to send you an extender. We're going to send you a mesh net. And so this is a very different conversation than the conversations they can have today. And it all stems from that visibility. That visibility is also the basis for what we do in terms of anomaly detection, which I'll talk about in a moment, around detecting problems and security issues. We have a care portal. This a web-based UI that care professionals can use. This is great for when we do trials with ISPs. It's also good for smaller ISPs that don't have their own back-end system. And we have a set of APIs that allow us to integrate in with the back-end systems if they have their own. So that's our architecture. Subscriber app. Told you that mortals were important from day one. We have a marketing team that includes a kick-ass designer. And so we evolve this. We think that you have to think about the ease of use. Consumers love their apps. They use their apps. They need to love our app, even though they're not going to use it all the time. And so we keep that in mind as we're developing it. We have a score for your network. Make it very, very simple, a little bit like a FICO score. There are issues, learn more, click here. We do not overburden end users with our mobile app with alerts. We've adopted the premise that I'm going to alert you only if something really bad has happened and you have to take action. I may give you an ephemeral notice if it's configured that way to basically say, hey, here's something you might want to know about. You can go to the Minim app to find more. It'll disappear. But in most cases, it's really just going to be something really bad has happened. Here's what we did. Here's what you have to do. And some of the other aspects in here, I mean, we have pretty robust parental controls. I'll go a little deeper in a second on that. We think about secure from the start. So, you know, we built our system to be secure. We spend the time to hack it. We bring in people to try and hack it to make sure. I'm not inviting any of you to do that in your spare time. There's secure connectivity. We have multi-factor authentication and audit trail for everything we're doing. We don't perform DPI. And so this is a little bit of a competitive weapon because there's some competitors out there that are doing deep packet inspection. By the nature of deep packet inspection, if you do it, we do not know how you can say you're GDPR compliant. So we're only sending partial headers for analysis, and PI is never collected from the router. We destroy the data, and there's an agreement that we have with our service providers and with the end user, which is pretty self-explanatory. Calling it the Minim security blanket. Here are the elements. Anomaly detection to stop attacks and alerts. And so some of this, I would say, is AI with a very small font A and a very small font I to start with. You know, you move up, and so some of that is very. So I'll take away the AI. It's simple stuff like understanding that you know, blocking known bad addresses from coming into our network and blocking our devices from talking to them. When you go beyond it, we will do things like knowing that a single-purpose IoT device versus a multi-purpose IoT device has a profile that is pretty understandable, and this is part of the dynamic aspect of our database. So we know that, and I'll pick on my favorite victim. We know that the Hunter HydroWise connected irrigation controller, we know the servers that they talk to, and we know that they shouldn't be talking to servers in Russia or China. And we know that they are. So we block that from happening. But this is back to consumers want their stuff to work. Question I'll pose to you is, if that sprinkler system is still working and we've blocked it from talking to servers in China and Russia, does the user care? Do they want us to turn it off? Right, so this is something, if you think about that same thing happening in an enterprise network or an industrial network, you would shut down that device and say, forget it, it's compromised. But if you can isolate the device and it's still doing the work, that's all users care about. And so that, you know, but that can also be pretty tricky too. Talked about privacy protection. We think admission control is important. And so beyond just having the SSID and password, We have another layer of admission control, which basically, if configured, will pop up on the user's app and basically say, do you want this device, and since we do the fingerprinting, we know what the device is, to attach to your network. And so one of the use cases there is your kid has his friends over and gives them all the SSID. Do you want them on? It's a service person who needs to get on board. And so this gets into guest networking in the way that we can use it as well. I talked a little bit about playbooks and analytics before. I'm going to go very quickly through this. So we have AI-guided anomaly detection. We understand how that Sonos Play 5 behaves, and not just behaves across our entire network, but how it behaves on Paul's network, because the way that Paul uses it is very different than the way that Ann uses it. And so to detect anomalies, we can't simply say 90% of the people who are using it use it like Paul, 10% use it like Ann, and so therefore Ann's in the minority report, and that's bad. It's got to be much more personal. It can be informed by the wisdom of the crowd, but it has to be tailored to an individual, and that's important as you think about training models. We keep compromised devices from harming the network, and so particularly if you think about legacy devices, and this is to the inception of the company, Mirai Botnet was launched through crappy knockoff Nest cameras, internet-connected cameras with hard-coded username and password. Those things will never be updated. Most of the vendors of them are out of business. How do you protect against that? We can protect against it at the network level, and we call that notion virtual patching. Talked about privacy. This is a little glimpse of what the new admission control would look like. We've got I think pretty robust and pretty understandable parental controls. And we also take great caution in protecting the router itself. It's one thing to protect all the devices, but if the router is a single point of failure, it is a compromise point, we need to protect that as well. I mentioned something about playbooks. These are things that are human understandable for both care professionals, and in the case we have to have a subscriber do something for them. And that's it. So that's a bit about our view of the world and our reason to be, and then a little bit about our solution. So I will absolutely stop there and take any questions you might have on Minim, industry. If anyone's curious what I'm seeing in the investment world writ large, I'm happy to take that too.
You mentioned the virtual patching for the shoddy third-rate, 1999 webcams. How does that work exactly?
So, in part, this is some of the research that we do, in terms of collecting information, and in part, it's some of the stuff in terms of the elfin magic that's going on behind. But to know, I'll use the example of a shoddy internet camera. To know that if there's a hard-coded password and a username is not that hard to figure out. Right. Things might even be transmitted in plain text, and there's some other stuff that you can figure out. And we test a lot of these devices. Right. So part of it is also looking at who the transmitters are, where the source addresses are, and where people are coming from, and understanding the traffic. Okay. And so we know, for instance, we're going to. There should not be, if that is a shoddy internet camera, or even I'll use the Nest camera. There shouldn't, someone trying to telnet into a Nest camera shouldn't happen.
Right. Okay. So it's really about kind of behavioral detection and then blocking, like you block the traffic or you blacklist that device?
So there's two different levels. We will block the traffic.
Yep.
For sure, we block the traffic, and when we can detect that there's this anomaly, and then in terms of turning off the device, the kind of the ultimate isolation of a device is we can kick it off the network.
Right.
And we can do that as well.
Yeah, great presentation. A lot of interesting ideas. So I'm just coming from the 5G summit in Washington, D.C., and it was a week of very informative session. One of the big takeaways that I got was that 5G is going to be 10 times faster than 4G, and that gives you the bandwidth. And to your point, you made earlier point about 5G potentially replacing your Wi-Fi at home.
Yeah.
The same point was made during the conference. So if that happens, how are we going to be able to zone, still as private zone, because there's not going to be a Wi-Fi router at home protecting your private IoT devices within the house. If you're going to use the towers,
So
how
if
does that going to work out?
So
Or what are some mechanisms that you use?
So so the question is, around, is it 5G? Think about it as a hub, kind of a hub, hub and spoke 5G to everything, or is it 5G to the home router and then Wi-Fi internally? And
it's going to be private zoning through that.
And so there's still the first level of this, at least from the conversations we've been having with ISPs, is 5G to the home, Wi-Fi internally. That's the first level. In terms of zoning, some of this stuff is still in the future. There's also this question about if they're 5G to some devices, Wi-Fi to other devices, you still got Zigbee and other protocols that are there. How do you think about subscription pricing in terms of all the devices as well? So this is, I don't have a great answer for that right now. I think this is something that we're still studying, and we just participated in the Verizon 5G kind of playground they had in Manhattan a couple of weeks ago. And so we're spending time with the ISPs who are driving this to try and understand it.
Do you see your technology perhaps being used as one of these like things you mentioned was isolation?
Yeah.
Can that be used like through 5G as isolating the compromised home IoT device through your platform? Because the IoT 5G provider is not going to have the isolation mechanism. Just because they're not going to have the router.
No, they're not. And there's also this question about for these newer devices, particularly ones that are direct 5G enabled, what are they doing for security in terms of themselves? And this is where there are a bunch of vendors that are out there trying to focus on endpoint security and to build that in directly to the endpoint. So I think it's a great question, and it's something that we need to spend more time on. It is not, I don't see this as impending doom for us. There are things that have to happen before that, but it's something that we're going to certainly keep a watchful eye. And now that you mentioned, I'm going to go try and get the download from that 5G summit you went to.
What you described sounds familiar if you use the Xfinity X5 app.
Yep.
And I don't know if you're actually behind that, or
we are not, but we know the Comcast guys really well.
right. Yeah.
And we know what they're building their stuff on top of, which is that their stack is really Plume and Cujo. So the Plume is being used for mesh. So the mesh extenders that in the X5 stuff, and then they're using Cujo to do some of the fingerprinting. And so in some respects, we're providing X5 for everybody else.
Right.
We think that we so we obviously think that our service is better and more comprehensive. We, as you might imagine, we have X5, we have FiOS, we have a bunch of different service providers to understand exactly and test what they have. Yeah, but there's definitely some overlap in terms of what we provide versus what they do.
The X5 app is phenomenal. I think we've done a great job with it. Yeah.
They have. It's a close friend of mine who runs that group. Back there.
It's just seemed like commercial industrial networks as well. Have you considered that?
So it's a good question. I don't know if I've ever heard it. This seems applicable to commercial. Yeah. So the question was, this seems like it'd be applicable to commercial, industrial. Also, we look at the SMB or the really small businesses. When you think about mom and pop shops and things of that sort, multiple dwelling units. These are also, we've had inbound interest for a bunch of these things: college campuses, healthcare facilities. So startups have to focus. We have to start somewhere, and so I think what we'll probably see is a bit of an evolution. The things that are closer adjacencies over time will roll out, but I think we want our footprint in subscriber homes and the learning to be greater, and our strategy is to work through channels, and so our channels are both working with ISPs, but also with hardware vendors directly who want to offer their own services. And so the idea that a hardware vendor might offer an overlay service, a subscription service, and target some of those businesses, I think is pretty likely.
So I'm kind of curious, we talked
were opened up with a little bit of the sort of a political, governmental regulation, all that stuff going on. And when I think about, I don't want to pick on Elizabeth Warren, but I will anyway. When I think about some of her platform and what she's talked about, and then you look at something like Amazon getting into this maybe the ISP space. And on the one hand, you think, well, maybe that's a pretty good thing. I mean, they're a very powerful company. They can probably provide some really robust solutions. But that would seem to sort of fly in the face of Elizabeth Warren's kind of, bust them up. And I just wonder, not the consequence, but, some things like you talked about, there, sort of the people who are very comfortable with the technology and then kind of everybody else. And everybody else is listening to Elizabeth Warren. And Elizabeth Warren is trying to craft a platform to everyone else. And, I just sort of wonder what some of the implications of that might be.
So we, thinking that politics could affect our business model is something that it's not like on the, one of the things I do when I'm looking at investing in a company, I'm certainly doing it as I'm a co-founder of one, is kind of look at rate risks. And we go from like super high, super high for a startup will be not can you build the technology, because if you're worried you can't build the technology, it really shouldn't be a startup. But it could be, in this case, any customer's going to buy it. Like, for two guys and a dog kind of sitting in a basement coming up with an idea. The regulatory side, you can think about it as a risk or an enabler. And so we've talked more about what Mark Warner has been doing, kind of focusing on privacy and security as being an enabler for us. And so we spent time, Mark is a recovered venture capitalist himself. And so we spent time with his office talking about it.